We want to welcome our viewers once again to the EPA's monthly feature, The Environment Matters, where we feature the work of the agency through our various departments, our individual staff, and through events and activities coordinated by the EPA to improve sensitization and also to improve awareness on environmental issues that matters to the public. My name is Karen Watson, Senior Environmental Officer with the EPA, and we want to remind our viewers that this program will be aired 4 more times right here on the NCN, so please stay tuned and just look below your screen for the dates you can view it on. For our feature today, we have our 2 guests, Mr. Imole Mc Donald and Ms. Sharifah Razack. Mr. Imole Mc Donald, he's the coordinator for compliance enforcement, and Ms. Sharifah Razack, she's the coordinator for the authorization. Both of them are within the Technical Secretariat Department of the EPA. Welcome to you, guys. For our first program, we would have looked at an overview of the EPA, its function, its mandate. For this program, we're focusing on how the EPA is directly involved in regulating businesses and operators. And for that, you two play a key role. What exactly is the role of the Technical Secretariat within the EPA?
Thank you, Karen, for having me, and I welcome this opportunity to share what we do at the EPA in terms of regulating businesses. The Technical Secretariat has 2 distinct roles. One is authorizations. I will speak a little bit about the authorizations aspect, and I think my colleague will pick up there with the other aspect, which is compliance and enforcement. So environmental authorization is actually a very important function of the Environmental Protection Agency. It is a process, and environmental authorizations is actually very good for the environment. It's good for people as well, and it's also good for the businessman, the developer too. So you may ask, why is it such a good thing? The environmental authorization holds businesses to conditions which makes them operate in a way to protect the environment, people, and even themselves, and to while at the same time allowing them to be productive in their business and to have less conflicts with the community and this kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah. We know a lot of business people, a lot of persons in the public, they know the importance of having a GRA license, you know, the importance of having a fire service license, you know, and sometimes these licenses are prerequisites to getting another license, and also it may be prerequisite to getting a loan from the bank. But not a lot of persons understand the importance of having an EPA permit, you know? And I want you to explain to the public what exactly is an environmental authorization. What is it, you know, and why is it necessary?
Well, I touched a little bit overall on the importance of the environmental authorization, but an environmental authorization is actually the end of a process. It is, it starts with a developer or a business person making an application to the agency, informing us of a proposed project that he or she would like to implement. And then the agency will take the application through various stages. And eventually, once all the stages are completed, then the environmental authorization is given to the developer. Now, the environmental authorization, as I mentioned before, has conditions, and it says to the operator how he must operate. How he must operate to ensure that the air is protected, the water quality is protected, how living things are not to be impacted on overly, and also how in protecting all of these aspects of the environment, people themselves are safeguarded. So that in a nutshell is what environmental authorization is about.
So, but how would there may be a business person operating and they may be operating ignorantly in terms of not knowing that they need an environmental authorization? How do they know that they need an authorization? You know, who needs a permit to operate? Just give us an idea of the types of sectors, you know, the types of activities that would require a permit from the EPA.
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency is given powers via the Environmental Protection Act, and the Act caters for us having asking any development that may have an impact on the environment to apply for authorization. But to answer your question more directly, in terms of sectors, it's also stated in a schedule in the Act, the fourth schedule, some types of projects that will need to apply for authorization. So these include hotels, inns, and so on. Once it's above 10 rooms, you have to apply for environmental authorization. It involves logging operations. It involves waste treatment facilities, poultry and swine rearing operations, spray painting operations. I'm going through some projects that are normal in society. So if you are living in a neighborhood and there is a spray painting operation, then you are within your right to find out from the agency if that operation has an environmental authorization. Right? So those are some examples. And you have some projects from different scales as well. In terms of, when I say scale, I mean size. You have small projects that require authorizations. You also have medium-sized projects that require authorizations. You have large projects that require authorizations. Mining projects, sand mining.
Oil and gas.
Yeah. Well, now oil and gas is to the fore right now, so that is considered mining. It's mining of oil, for oil. So that is that requires environmental authorization as well. So there is a whole gamut of projects that require to apply, that are required to apply to the EPA for environmental authorization.
And as the compliance enforcement coordinator, are there issues that are encountered in terms of nuisances or pollution caused due to the operation of these sectors? How would the compliance enforcement, your area, deal with issues arising out in terms of pollution caused by these sectors?
Well, once again, thanks, Karen, for having me here. Yes, indeed, there are numerous issues arising as a result of developers not understanding their need to be authorized. So, like Sharifah's pointed out, there are a whole gamut of projects that require authorization, and you should seek out the agency's permission. Albeit, again, I'll emphasize, a lot of our citizens do not understand that the Environmental Protection Agency is your first line of contact if you're going to be engaged in development of any projects of any nature. But most of them do not know this, so you find they go ahead, a development takes off without our knowing, and the nuisances follow, and it is not until such time that we receive complaints that we actually have to go in and turn around the whole process, which is very difficult.
So how does the agency treat complaints, you know? What complaints warrant the agency's response? in terms, because we cannot respond to every complaint, because we
Correct.
know we receive a gamut of complaints
Yes.
from the public. But what really warrants the agency's response?
All right, so there's a process in terms of treating complaints. Complaints are received by the agency, and I want to make it absolutely clear that all our officers at the EPA can receive your complaints. That's number one. We receive your complaints via telephone or in person. Those complaints are processed based on the media affected. So if it's air, something relating to air, maybe a spray painting operation, it may be something relating to water, a fish processing plant depositing its waste in the rivers, etc. So according to media, your complaint is processed, and the relevant officers within the agency are assigned to that complaint. In relation to what warrants the attention of the EPA, well, like I said, if you have livestock rearing operations that do not, that surpass a certain amount, you have to be authorized. Spray painting operations, welding shops, even mining activities. One example of such is the situation at Mortaro, where further upstream the Demerara River, we have mining that's affecting communities lower down. So yes, to answer your question, there's a whole gamut of activities that would require attention, as long as it's within our purview. Yes.
Getting back to the authorization process, Sharifah, we know that operations that have an impact on the environment need to be authorized. But how exactly do they become authorized? Let's give us a walkthrough of the authorization process so that the general public could know and understand what is involved.
All right, I will try to differentiate what happens. You have, as I mentioned before, we have small projects, and we have projects of different scales, medium, large, and so on. So when the application is submitted to the agency will look at the application. It's a process that's called screening. We look at the application, and we look at certain things. Well, how large is this project? What are the likely impacts of this project? Where is this project going to be situated? How do we think it's going to affect communities, rivers, and biodiversity, and that kind of thing? And after that screening process, we will determine whether this project will have a significant impact on the environment. And if we think that, based on our screening, that this project will have significant impacts, then this project will go into one of two tracks. So the track that will go in is the EIA required track. And if we think the project, on the other hand, will not have significant impact on the environment, then that project will go to the EIA not required track. All right? So once we have made that decision, we publish a public notice. For both of them, public notices are published, but there's a slight difference in how long the notice is. For the EIA required projects, the notice is 28 days, and for the EIA not required, the public notice is 30 days. Now, what's the importance of this public notice? For viewers out there, do read your newspapers. The notice is for you. It's for people in the community where the project is planned to be. And it's for concerned persons, stakeholders, to give us feedback, to make comments as to what they think will be the effect of this project on them, whether they think the project may impact on them in any way or on their environment in any way. And so it's a public process where you want the community, you want people to be engaged in terms of what's going on, what the project will be. So the EPA needs this kind of feedback from the public. And based on that feedback, if there are no objections, for example, nobody objects to a project that does not require an EIA, then that project will go on to other stages of permit drafting and so on. But I should mention that for EIA not required projects in particular, site visits are conducted to ascertain the information submitted by the developer, right? Because people could write things on paper that may not be true when you get on the ground, but the EPA has a responsibility to verify that this is indeed what is the situation on the ground, right? So it's for EIA required projects, the public period, the comments that are received are taken on board when the EPA sets out the scope of the environmental impact assessment. EIA actually means environmental impact assessment. So yeah, so that's taken on board for determining in terms of what needs to be studied. The scope is really saying what needs to be studied in the environmental impact assessment, all right? So for the environmental impact assessment to be done, the EPA also needs to approve qualified persons to conduct this study, because it's scientific studies, it's social studies, and so the persons who are conducting the study have to have that competency to actually conduct the studies. So the EPA has to ascertain that yes, indeed, these persons have that competency to conduct the study. So we have to approve the consultants, and we finalize the scope of the EIA. We kind of refer it as the terms of reference of the EIA with the consultants, because remember, these are experts and they may have an input as well, which are considered, these inputs are considered as well by the EPA. And so then after that stage, the impact study will be conducted, and then the report of the study will be submitted to the EPA. And then that report, the public is notified of the report, and they can review the report. And the report is also sent to the Environmental Assessment Board for review, which is an independent body, a statutory body. It's an independent body. It's the board is appointed and it's gazetted, and it changes, but it has to go through that legal process. And so they will review that report and recommend to the EPA whether they think it's satisfactory. It's satisfactory, met the terms of reference. It's satisfactory, looked at the impacts, the potential impacts of the project. And based on that, now this EIA required project is at the stage where the permit will be drafted, right? Actually, the environmental impact assessment is very important to the EPA because it provides sound scientific information on which the EPA can make its decision on whether or not to authorize this project, right?
So you've spoken a lot on the environmental impact assessment process and its involvement in the permitting process to the stage of actually getting a permit. We want the general public to know that many persons, the majority of applications we receive for projects, many of them don't have to go through the environmental impact assessment process. So it starts with us receiving an application. We just want them to understand. They submit an application to us. Do they have to come into us, or can they download an application online and
of course
fill it out and so forth?
And
the fees attached.
So now, the application forms can be downloaded from our website, and it's www.epaguyana.org. And you have different kinds of forms that are downloadable depending on whether it's a new project. You have a specific form for that. whether you are renewing your application for environmental authorization, that is, if you've had an authorization before, and it has expired and you want to, or it's approaching expiry, and you want to now renew that authorization, then there's another form. There's also another form for variance, and that is if you want to vary your project, right? So you can complete those forms and submit them. You print them off and you submit them to the EPA, and the application fee for new applications is $50 US, or the equivalent in Guyana dollars, right?
Which is about 10,000.
Yeah, which is about 10,000 roughly. And then you have variance applications that will vary depending on what your permit fee is. Like to vary, you would have had an authorization before, and so based on that permit fee, then the fee for variance of application will be calculated. And similarly for renewal as well, the renewal application, the fee is also calculated based on what the original permit fee was for the application. I could give you specific values, but
those details we can get.
Yeah,
you can check
on the website. Yes. But just to say that currently the highest fee that you pay per year for a permit, and this is for large-scale operations, is $3,100 US, and the lowest fee is $100 US per year.
We know persons still on the authorization process. We'll come back to Imole in a few. We know persons complain, a lot of developers complain about our process taking a bit long. And there are many issues that may affect that process. What can delay the environmental permitting process at the EPA?
Well, when you download the form online, there is a list of documents that are on that. There's a list of documents that need to be submitted along with your application. So that is one point of delay. Developers may not submit, they may submit the application and may not have all the supporting documentation, and therefore the EPA cannot proceed with the process. So that will be a delay, right? If it's in the case of a renewal, this is where Imole will come in, and for a renewal to happen, there will need to be a compliance audit on your operation. So if the EPA turns up at your operation in your developer, and it will now make checks against the permit that was issued to see if you have been operating based on how the permit states you should be operating. And if there is non-compliance, well, then the EPA may ask you to come into compliance before you get your renewal. So that could be a delay as well.
Yes, and added to that, again, the renewal form has a list of documents that has to be submitted. Now, many developers take for granted that they will just reapply or renew their permit based on what they originally submitted. Let's say a permit of 5 years ago, what you submitted 5 years ago. The dynamics of your project may have changed over time. So hence the reason for the compliance audit, one, and two, because there would have been changes in your operation. Maybe you moved up from 300 meat birds to 1,000. That means that your plan has to be redrawn and resubmitted to us. So like Sharifah is saying, many developers have to be brought into compliance. Some may not understand why, but this is the process is very straightforward, and we are there to help you and explain to you in terms of compliance and in terms of renewing your operation, the things that you should be submitting to the agency to avoid delays in the process.
Okay. I know I mentioned Imole, your area that the area that you're focused on is compliance enforcement. Can you just explain to the viewers the difference, compliance enforcement, and how that, affects the whole gamut of operations?
All right. So the agency views compliance and enforcement as very important to what we do. Important not only to what we do, but important for the health and well-being of our citizens and the health and well-being of the environment. Compliance, like I explained earlier, projects are on the ground, they're authorized by the agency, there are stipulations within those permits as to how projects should be run, and the agency ensures that you comply with what you have agreed to in that permit, right? Enforcement, on the other hand, you step outside of what you agreed to via your permit. This is where we can issue enforcement actions against you. So basically our role in terms of compliance and enforcement, I usually say it's twofold. It's ensuring compliance with what you have agreed to via your permit, and secondly, it's enforcing those conditions that you've agreed to. So in essence, that's how we view compliance and enforcement.
So if a person who has already obtained a permit from the EPA, and that permit has certain stipulation in terms of how they should operate, in terms of treating the air quality, the water quality, and how they should manage their waste. And once the EPA officers go on site, look at that permit, cross-checks, and if they're not in compliance with what the permit stipulates, what can happen?
All right. So essentially, a compliance audit is done on a project. That audit report is sent back to the office, is brought back to the office, done in office actually, and your list of non-compliances are defined based on your permit conditions. So it's your permit conditions versus your non-compliance, right? And that is what the officers have pinpointed on the ground that you are non-compliant with, those aspects of the permit. You are then so informed via letter from the agency that you've been audited, and these are the areas that you need to come into compliance with. When a developer becomes non-compliant, the agency further will write you again, or you may approach the agency for a renewal of your permit. At that point, we cannot proceed with the renewal of your permit because you would not have brought your operation up to standard, up to the standards of the EPA.
If I may add, one thing that almost every permit will ask the project operator to submit an annual report.
Yes.
And many projects do not comply. So if they have a permit for 5 years, they may be lagging in terms of the annual reports. So when it's time for renewal, they now have to go back and submit all of that. So those are things can also lead to delay in renewal of authorization.
And I know we don't want to we don't want to be much of a punitive agency where we want to punish businesses. We want to help.
Yes,
We're here to
of
help
course.
and assist. How does the agency assist developers in terms of helping them to fulfill their obligation under the permit they would receive from us, in terms of helping them to improve and maintain and sustain the environment?
Well, if I may jump in before Sharifah, we have something called compliance assistance. A developer may not fully understand the tenets of his or her permit. Let's say, for instance, a gas station. You're instructed by way of permit to have an oil water separator on your establishment, but you don't know how to go about installing this thing or what to use, all right, you make contact with us at the agency. Our officers are there to assist you and to guide you through that process. So that's one area in which we can help. Sharifah may have something else to add.
Yes, we have published guidelines for some sectors, and these guidelines have been approved by our board, and they are actually what people who are operating in those sectors need to take guidance from in terms of how they set up their operations and run their operation. We have for poultry rearing, swine rearing, spray painting operations, for example, storage of batteries, and a few, Karen, I think you may know more of them than I do. And so we do have we work on standard, on things that people can just come in, download from our website. They're there, and you can follow those to get the law. You can always call in to the agency. I personally I'm big on helping people on the on the telephone. Once you ask a question and I can get that answer for you, or I'll call you back. I'm good at doing that. I call people back, to follow up on their permits and to follow up on anything that they would like, because we are there to serve the country. We're there to serve developers and the public. So yes, you just need to make contact with the agency. You can come into the agency, you can call us, and if you're reading the application form and you find that we can direct you to persons who may be able to assist you in whatever sector it is you're operating in, to fill out those forms and also answer your questions, get it so that when you bring your application in, it is complete and the process can start right away.
Imole, getting back to issues of addressing complaints. We know certain activities, certain developmental activities, pollution is inevitable. It can be prevented. For example, swine rearing activities. We have our sawmills. Dust will be emitted from a sawmill. You will get odor from a swine rearing operation or poultry rearing operations. What mechanisms, how does the agency, what's the process for addressing complaints? Because we know the aim is to bring a resolution to issues regarding complaints. So how do we as the agency address? What's the process?
All right, so
to give the public an understanding?
Yes, we receive, so your complaints are received at the agency. We treat it according to the respective media that's affected, like I said before. We try to treat with complaints within a 14-day period, and that is because of the agency's constraint of lack of officers, actually. We would like to, and ultimately this is our goal or desire, to be able to respond maybe like a 911 agency, but unfortunately we're not there just yet. So we receive your complaints, we try to treat with it within maybe a 14-day period. After that, a report is done up, and there is some definitive solution for both complainant and the polluter. So that is how we're working right now.
What advice will you give to business people? Because if you're going to start a poultry rearing operation in a residential area, that will pose an issue.
It will, of course.
And a sawmill operation in a residential area, that will pose an issue.
Yes.
What can we advise persons as the EPA? Because we know that we are not the only regulators involved in maintaining environmental standards or upholding environmental safeguards. What are some other sector agencies that we rely on also to assist in environmental protection?
All right. So to begin with the first part of the question, and I like to say this to persons out there, the Environment Protection Agency should not be seen as a last resort. The Environment Protection Agency is the first point of contact in terms of development, giving consent to development. And it's this simple. You approach the agency, we do our part in conjunction with other agencies such as the Central Housing and Planning Authority, the NDCs, Ministry of Communities, etc., to ensure that your investment is guarded. So in other words, and I've had numerous examples of cases where, let's say, poultry operators or livestock operators are just, oh, I got some money, I decide to invest in stock. I live in an area that's heavily built up residence, and I throw up my pig pen or my fowl pen right there, and then it becomes a problem because you did not seek the agency's permission. You did not seek the permission of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, or maybe the Lands and Surveys Department, but you just decided to go willy-nilly and operate. And then complaints started coming. We now have to come and shut you down, and then you see the agency as a punitive kind of agency when it's in actuality it's not. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of complaints we receive, apart from being within Region 4, the EPA is centralized.
Yes.
And we know that may pose a logistical challenge to addressing complaints in remote areas, in outlying areas.
Yes.
How does the agency address those complaints?
Well,
for example, Region 1, Region 7, 8.
Well, first and foremost, all complaints engaging the agency's attention, we try to address them. All right? Of course, the ones in the outlying regions, what we try to do is to gather a lot of information, because then that's a trip in itself that has to be planned for. And we don't want to turn up somewhere in Region 7 to investigate a complaint and then there's nothing there. So what we try to do, we try to gather as much information as possible from the complainant. The case I raised earlier is the Mortaro incident, where further upstream there's mining, and we had the Tushao and residents of those communities downstream coming in to meet with us at the agency, bringing pictures, phone evidence, etc., that we can work on. And that complaint, that's how our officers are able to go on the ground to do their investigations and so on. So we treat every complaint coming into the agency. We try to meet with it as best as we can.
I think, of course, we will also, for far outlying areas, we will rely on established bodies that are there that may be able to do some ground truthing for us and give us feedback as to say whether, yes, this is a situation, because a government-to-government interaction is always good for the EPA, so that, government agency to government agency, so that we could actually know, yes, this is what we're going to go and find on the ground, because it was supported by, the information was supported or verified by somebody who's there on the ground. And it's not like, we also, it could be a village council, it could be a chairman of a NDC, or anybody who, with some level of authority, who we could work with in that area as well to get feedback from. So we do rely on partnerships as well, both in investigation of complaints as well as other aspects of our work too.
With that, a point you raised earlier, the agency is centralized, and we are currently embarking on establishing regional offices. We'll soon be opening the office at WIM on the Quarantine, so Region 6, and I guess later on we'll be moving to the other regions to open up offices so that our presence could be spread out across the country.
So the EPA, we Imole would have mentioned it, Sharifah backed it up. We issue first development consent, meaning that you come to us first, get our advice, get our guidance, and with what are the necessary requirements for starting a business. Can you name some other agencies that we would also collaborate with and coordinate with?
Yes, well, a good example is the Forestry Commission. We collaborate with them so that they insist that persons in the forestry sector setting up projects, that they must be in our process, they must be authorized by us. Similarly, the Guyana Energy Agency is another example. We even for I don't want this to talk to forget this, because even we find in the NDCs in some areas are insisting that for noise, short-term noise and so on, they are telling people, well, you need to come to the EPA. They have, so it is, we are getting support from some of these other agencies.
Not cutting you, but you brought up an important issue, the noise management campaign we recently had. And just give the public an idea, because persons do come to us for short-term noise permits. If you have to have a wedding in the outdoor, just give us an idea in terms of noise authorization.
Yes, it's our culture. We have limes and barbecues and weddings and so on, and we will play music, and we will, persons who are engaged in playing of music at a certain volume will require a permit, a noise permit from the EPA, and they should make an application, come into the